Everybody, welcome back to the Citizen Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Todd, here with my co host, Evan, and we have a special guest today, John Valentine. John Valentine is a interesting individual. I've had some short communications with him on Instagram, but everything that he's doing, I am fully intrigued in, and it is driving me to approach things differently in my self-defense training, and I hope it'll do the same for you. So, John, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
So, where is it? What's your background? Like, where did you start getting into all of this in the defensive space?
So, I joined the military when I was 18 years old, and I was kind of inspired by. I was 16 years old, living in New York City when 9/11 happened. So, that put a frame of reference in my mind that no one's going to come save us, right? Like there's going to be something, and you're going to have to do your part, and the enemy will come to where you live and try to destroy as much as you love as possible, right? So that was that kind of shocked me when I was young, and I kind of grew up having a kind of a rough childhood in terms of uh, in New York City, the in the 90s is kind of like the tail end of the crack epidemic. So so I was forced to have to learn to fight, or I was just going to get beaten, all the time. So that was kind of my life, and that led me into the military. And from the military, I discovered or was introduced to grappling. I'd grown up doing traditional martial arts, boxing, and I'd never grappled before, just because like culturally, it just seemed as something that was like unmanly. And so we did that, and I was like, wow, this is very real. It's very intense. I don't know what this stuff is, this combative stuff. That's what I want to do. And I kept on bouncing around, looking for place to place, and found some grappling places and things like that. And come to fast forward a few years later, deployed to Afghanistan, then I'm deployed in Iraq. There's a guy there with an accent. I thought he was a Hispanic guy, but come to find out he's Brazilian. And he was a jiu-jitsu blue belt. And he was like, oh man, this is called jiu-jitsu. This is what I do. And so trained with him for the entire time that I was in Iraq, and I just caught the bug. As soon as I got back from Iraq, went to Brazil, trained there for a week, and just kind of like just dove into that head first. Got really serious about it. Competed and internationally. I competed in Europe, I competed in the United States. From there, fought MMA, fought a boxing match. And then after I separated from the army, I got my concealed carry permit. So this is like 2012, and Hurricane Sandy hits, and I've got all this experience in terms of training against external resistance. And when things got really crazy with everything that happened during Hurricane Sandy, I didn't really know too much to do. So I found a readiness network and started my training journey there. Got my permit, and I was asking the guy that ran the Readiness Network. He was a retired Green Beret guy. I asked him, like, is there anything like a concealed carry combatives program? Because like I went through this process that tells me I can't just burn somebody down for slapping me. That I've got to be able to de-escalate, or essentially that there's a ton of room left between harsh words and then when lethal force is introduced. So what does that look like to fight somebody while armed with a gun legally? And I was a perp at the time. He's like, well, you're probably better qualified to come up with something like that. And uh, I really didn't accept that, where I just kind of I knew there was a lot I didn't know. So it just kind of took me down this path. I was like, well, let me find somebody that I think would know. And the only person that came to mind was the creator of the Army Combatives Program, Matt Larson. I look him up. I'm living in North Virginia at the time, and he was living 10 minutes from my house, or he was running a gym 10 minutes from my house. Go there, introduce myself. He's actually in the market for a trainer to help him with a government contract in the area. So I end up getting into this like 3-year apprenticeship with him, of where I'm working and training directly with Matt Larson, training a lot of war fighters in the DC area, and just really immersing myself in terms of like this adaptive approach to martial arts. What does it look like to, I thought I knew a lot about fighting, and I really realized like there was so many things I didn't know, and especially in terms of like training other people how to fight, like transposing those skills to other people. And Matt taught me a lot about that. Then we got, end up training with a bunch of other people, or training for other people, training other companies. Um, Sheepdog Response is probably kind of one that people know, and then Green Ops led to me coming out with under my own banner, finding Range Master, and kind of like this core group of people who have been doing serious work, and producing a serious body of work for a long time. Finally, meet Craig Douglas in 2020, and I didn't realize like how much of this world, how much there was being that was kind of like already thoroughly explored, but just not really talked about in that sense. A lot of what I want to say kind of the majority of the collective consciousness within the training space, they were kind of looking for very unidisciplined, compartmentalized solutions, typically in the form of gear. No one really thought about in terms of like enhancing the skill, at least not beyond firing a gun. And so started talking about these things, and a lot of what I saw with combatives was incredibly frustrating with me. I ended up starting a Facebook group where we just talked about that, and um, led to finding Cliff Byerly, Ben Albin from Redbeard Combatives, and just kind of it ended up becoming this umbrella for all of the leading practitioners, and leading and thought leaders, people who have been doing these things for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, and just for us to exchange ideas. And that ended up becoming the Combative Summit. I had to spend like thousands of my own dollars traveling and training, going to classes and everything like that. And I was like, well, what do you guys think if we just kind of got together in one roof over a weekend and just kind of hosted this thing? So that way we can have like somebody like Matt Larson and Craig Douglas. They're together observing like Aaron Ginetti discuss work, and yeah, everybody was all about it. Incredibly supportive. The whole idea of this Combatives Association, Combative Summit, that's been entirely a group effort, just of born out of the frustration that we have with having these kind of like freshman level conversations of like of okay, do you need to know how to fight? Like yes, like and then kind of we don't need to get into those conversations of like, hey, does my style beat your style kind of thing. Like those are very elementary level conversations. We start talking about the training methods, like what role does posture play? How do we form attachments? How do we articulate that? What exactly does positional control mean? How do we use martial arts instead of doing martial arts, and conversations like that. So um, that's kind of like that's how I ended up all here. If that makes sense. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, man. That's awesome. That's a wild ride leading up to this. Now, this is y'all just completed the second annual Combative Summit, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. I saw that one because I saw when you had posted that you had the first one. I was like, man, I'd like to go to that. Hopefully it works well and it goes again. And then y'all had it in Mississippi. Was Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was hoping I could make it there. And but things aren't playing out. But it is on my radar for sure. Cliff Barley, I actually want to go take a class with him. He's only a few hours from me in Kerrville. So he's been on my radar as well. But when it comes to, so I have like very like dipped a toe into like the combative space, right? My experience when it comes to anything martial arts was I did some I did some traditional martial arts when I was a kid. And then, as just recently, there's a gentleman that works with my wife that does BJJ, and he has some guys out of the university like, hey, if y'all want to get together and train, we get together and train. And so I spent a little bit of time for him with him. And for me, it was definitely drinking from a fire hose, right? For the first time, it was kind of like I describe it as I get on the mat with them, and it's the Ricky Bobby scene where I don't know what to do with my hands, kind of deal. And it was like I kind of had an idea of what was I could expect, but man, like just the first time rolling with him and him just like pretty much doing nothing, giving me an opportunity to try something and then just flipping it effortlessly, it was like it opened my eyes to how much I don't know against somebody who knows maybe not a ton, but more than I do specifically. So it was very interesting. I mean, recently I haven't trained with them. I do want to get into BJJ more on a set schedule. Unfortunately, right now my life doesn't allow for that schedule. But yeah, it's crazy how somebody can assert their will on you in that manner that it's just wild to me how much the technique comes into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like anything else. It's like if you're doing something with someone who's been doing it a lot longer than you, they're just kind of like make you feel helpless. But the thing about jujitsu specifically, I would say is like it's almost so counterintuitive in terms of like how the training is done. It's like you wouldn't expect to be able to fight off your back, but you can and you can do so quite effectively and be um, quite damaging even from something where traditionally people have seen as a position of a deficit, right? Um, and also the way the subtle nuances that you develop from going through that process of training this for not even I wouldn't I would say that you can honestly become a better fighter significantly from your first jujitsu class. There's always in doing a lot of different combative arts like practical shooting, jujitsu, and also with strength training. What I think, and this is my theory, that there is a novice linear progression in those things that you tend to learn the basics and gain a lot from the training relatively quickly. And then it becomes more you have to put in a lot more effort to start getting those incremental gains. And like specifically in jiu-jitsu, like you'll understand what winning looks like right away because that's what the hierarchy position does. It tells you exactly like it provides an overall fight strategy. If I get um, around the legs into the side control, that is better than me being inside your legs. If I go from the side control to seated on your chest in a mount position, that's even better. And if I can get behind you where you can't see me and I can hit you, that's the best position possible. So all these things they illuminate to us as far as the ability to inflict damage, right? Like that's what it is. There's an implied um ability, there's an implied statement in terms of like I can do a lot of damage to you here and I can mitigate a lot of damage from you. So even though it was like this is why like as I came into the tactical space, it was hard for me to accept a lot of what is kind of considered gospel here of like slow down, get your hits. You need to, make space and get away because like I do these things where I disprove a lot of this stuff on a regular basis. Like that does not make sense to me at all. And I had to be kind of I I, I want to say diplomatic to a point because it's like there are like you can't really everybody's kind of got their sacred cow in this business and it's like you don't really want to like make the wrong enemies and that's a big deal of mine. I don't want to make the wrong enemies, but there are just things that um where it's like we got to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's kind of the way where what I like about the combative summit instructors and as well as some of the other guys that I've interacted with, especially through practical shooting, is like they're able to they're able to focus on the training. They're not like all these guys are looking, and myself included, we're looking kind of like for a better answer, right? We're not looking to do well. We're looking to suck less because that's just the way fighting does. Like it's a massive pet peeve of mine where we're like, oh well, if you get into a knife fight, you're gonna get cut. Like I've been in a lot of different kinds of fights, and every single one of them, I took damage, even the ones that I was winning, because I put the person down on the ground, and you're fighting on asphalt. Even just banging your knees and your elbows on there, like taking a dominant position, like you incur damage even from doing that. So there's never really this way to fight where you don't receive damage unless you're controlling the fight from the furthest distance possible. But even then, like how do you decide between this benign encounter or this person
Hmm.
has really hostile intent, right? Like and contrary to popular belief, like bad guys, they're not dumb. I don't believe bad guys are dumb. I think I grew up in the ghetto, so when people are like, oh, these people, they don't they're turning to lives of crime because they don't have opportunity. Like, no, those people are turning to lives of crime because that is the opportunity. If I can make
Hmm.
thousands of dollars a day and be 14 years old, don't have to finish high school, like, and then what, you want me to go and work a minimum wage job? You want me to go to, like, there was a thing of a guy. I remember this commercial of Franklin going to work at McDonald's, working his way up to management, blah, blah, blah. And it became a running joke within like the kind of like the inner city communities, like fuck Franklin, because like no one wanted to do that shit. It's like, yeah, this guy's he's gonna work for 10 years before he's making thousands of dollars. And I'm making thousands of dollars today, every day. And so again, right, like the point there is like people turn to lives of crime because that's the opportunity. And they're
Hmm.
not dumb. Like they're doing risk assessments the same way we are. I mean, sure, their methods are sometimes they're kind of crude, but that's what they're doing. They understand what a soft target is, what's a hard target, and they understand like how to get the job done. They're in their environment operating on a regular basis. So it's like, what is the goal for training then? And since I'm going to be at a deficit, the real goal for me as far as skill development is to be overmatched in terms of anything I'm going to face, and also have a well-rounded set of skills to where I can take the fight to a place that this person is not comfortable.
Makes sense. I mean, and even going into all the different aspects you talked about training, right? Strength training, close quarters, essentially physical skills, be it grappling or striking or whatever form you have that you're going to rely on. Then the shooting, right? Then evolves you into that engagement for further distance, or if you make that space, neutralizing a target at that point, or allowing yourself to, evacuate the situation or whatever opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, and people will like, all right, hey, like if you tell someone like, hey, you can miss, you can be arm's reach within a person and still miss,
Hmm.
and it's hard for that to be. It's hard for people to believe that until you actually get them inside of a class and you have them put on the helmets and you go through sims and like one of the things I like to tell people when they're training with me is like you don't necessarily like I'm gonna frame the problem and I'm gonna show you guys as far as kind of the core skills, but like as far as like these conclusions I'm arriving at, like you guys don't even have to just listen to me. You can trust your own experience here. And that's
Hmm.
what's cool about like pressure testing and actually going and doing classes like this is that when if I provide you a realistic experience, right? Like that
Hmm.
is within control, right? That you almost get like kind of this post-traumatic growth where you understand like, okay, what my limitations are. I need to go like maybe the thing I need to do is actually just lose some weight or maybe get a little bit stronger. Maybe I need to learn some jujitsu. Maybe I need to improve my marksmanship. Like, but it may or may not be that. But you get to at least like when someone's kind of telling you this definitive answer, like you have that experience of like, well, I don't know how true that is, but I've been through this experience that, even in a controlled circumstance, that doesn't seem to work. So
Yeah.
like if the things don't work in a controlled circumstance where the conditions don't get better, I have all these safety limits and gear, and I'm training with my friends for the most part. How does that end up working in the situation where it couldn't be any worse? Like
Hmm.
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And it's, you know, and I'm itching to go do some force on force training. I've just yet to get to that. But it's always interesting to me when you see videos of people that are experiencing it for the first time, and which whatever scenario it is, sometimes how quickly they go to the gun versus, actually, it's something that hasn't really escalated to a deadly force situation. And clearly that's a Monday morning quarterback kind of thing, right? I'm looking at it from the outside in. But it's just interesting to see, like, man, these people feel that threatened just from this interaction that they feel justified going to the gun that quickly. And listening and to different podcasts and things like that. And even when I go out into the world and I'm carrying, like, I never have the mentality like I am 100. I know without a doubt that if anything comes my way, I will be the one that wins the day. Like, I never think that, because ultimately, um, I mean, somebody could walk up on me unsuspected with some sort of vendetta that I'm not aware of. And I mean, that's it. I lost right there, right? I don't have control all the time. Even, when there are a lot of people that think that they do have control just because they have a gun on them. It's like, all right, well, I have a gun on me today, and if anything pops off, I'm going to be the one to take care. Like, I don't know, you want to call that hero mentality or whatever it is, but that's whenever I have classes, I tell everybody that it's like, hey, you cannot expect that you're always going to win. You cannot expect that you're going to walk away unscathed. The best that you can do is try to prepare yourself to the best of your abilities, and hopefully that good enough that day was good enough.
Yeah, I mean, and the other side too is like we have to appropriate frame what winning looks like, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
for instance, you train with somebody doing jujitsu, and a lot of what they're going to do, their frame of reference in terms of like what winning looks like is like getting the tap. So a lot of times those guys are inclined to go kinetic. And like we got to think about like for the concealed carrier, there's three types of fights happening, right? There's a training before, okay. There's the fight when it happens, and then there's the aftermath, which usually is the form of injury and legal battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, especially if you work in or live in some place where the district attorney has a hard on for gun owners, like you're going to be dealing with a problem. Like who knows what the circumstances is? Like you're a white person that shot a black kid, and now all of a sudden it's like you don't have a racist bone in your body. All of a sudden you're the poster boy for white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there's all kinds of things that can get thrown on with social media and just things of that nature. So typically, like for me, or I like to illuminate to people, winning for the good guy, for the good citizen is going back to living life peacefully, going back to whatever it is. Like, I have like this idea that you lose a lot of rights when you decide that you're going to be an armed citizen. Number one is to be the first thing you lose is the luxury of being impulsive. Like you don't get to be like you always have to be the adult in the room. Like if there's someone who has an
Yeah.
issue with like you bumping them or smudging their sneaker or whatever it is, like you got to be the person like, yeah, look, here's my insurance, we'll form a claim. My bad, I'm sorry. You always have to be the bigger person, and that can be incredibly burdensome, especially like you have a bad day or something like that. But like you got something that could point at people and make them die on the spot. So that's like you have to be the good guy all the time. The second thing is that you lose that luxury of being naive or incapable. Like you can't be like the person who was like, I decided I'm going to carry a gun, and then when the time came and I needed to fire those shots, I was doing this blind emotional fire and just kind of launch rounds into the public, and all of a sudden I hit a bunch, I hit a person or people that I didn't mean
Mm-hmm.
intend to hit. And it's like, well, I didn't train the way I was supposed to. I just did this class. Like like that doesn't remove the fact that you're going to be accountable. That doesn't stop the unrelenting beast that is the legal system from coming after you and holding you accountable to those things. So defining what winning looks like for the armed citizen is like, I'm going to try to avoid this fight as much as possible. I'm going to be the good guy as much as possible. I'm going to be the adult in the room as much as possible. So that way, God forbid I ever have to get into that place where I have to fire a shot in anger and the authorities come and they're asking me these questions. Like, look, I'm here. I told them to stop. They continue to pursue me. I told them to leave. He attacked me. I defended myself. I want my lawyer. And I'm able to articulate from cradle to grave exactly what transpired in that situation where I did everything I could to avoid that. And that's really what kind of the well-rounded skill set does. I'm not I jiu-jitsu is just something part of I do, but that may not be the right thing to solve the problem. It may be, maybe give this guy $5 so he can fuck off kind of. That might be the thing
Mm-hmm.
that solves the problem. So like 20 years of jiu-jitsu, $5, that solved my problem kind of, right?
Yeah,
So
100%.
like we I don't want, so I saying all that is to point out like the things that we are training in, we don't want to transpose that directly. We still want to making sure that we're thinking about the tactical circumstances. Like, what does it take for me to walk away from here? Because like, I really don't want to get into this fight because I don't want to deal with all the nonsense that comes aftermath. Right. And if I have to, I will, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that that's not my fault or that's not something I pursued or I brought on myself as much as the would-be attacker did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. There's, we used to live out in the middle of nowhere, and I had some guys that showed up to the house one time, and they're like, "Hey, man, you got gas?" And this car's about to run out of gas. Do you have some money? And it's like, no. I may have a little bit of lawnmower gas in the back. You can use that to get to the gas station. It's like, man, why don't you just follow us to the gas station and give us $45? And at that point, it's like, dude, you need to leave
Yep.
right now. And it's kind of one of those that, they could tell like, okay, we've pushed our limits and we left. I've had a guy approach me at a gas station. This one was kind of funny because you can tell he's approached probably the wrong people before. He hollered out a bit from a distance, and I turned around, and he put his hands up like, "Hey man, I'm just trying to see if you got a little extra cash for gas." That's all it was. And I kind of laughed about that. But it was, talking about, decision making in the moment for our accountability. And I've talked about this on here before. At least I'm pretty sure I have. But when we lived out there, I was driving my wife's truck that day, and I was coming home, and there was a Toyota Tacoma that was going under the speed limit, and I went around and passed him, and he started picking up speed with me, and I didn't think anything of it other than, okay, either he's picking up or he's road raging a little bit. He probably followed me for probably about a mile, and then we got to our road, and I turned off, and he turned off with me, and he was still kind of keeping pace with me. And I was like, all right, well, just probably just happens to go this way. Pulled into my driveway, and I already kind of had it in my mind. I'm like, okay, if this dude pulls into my driveway, I need to be ready. And I pulled into my driveway, and the guy pulled into my driveway behind me. And we had just had our newborn, and I knew it's like, okay, in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to pull in right to the house because if this guy's road raging, the last thing I want is rounds flying towards me into the house. So I blade off to the side of the house. He comes off this way. I have my gun in my hand, and I push the door open, and I kick the door open to where I can hold it. That way, if I need to bring the muzzle up, I can bring the muzzle up. And the guy steps out on his side of the truck, and I'm waiting to see what he's going to present. And the guy steps out, and he goes, "Hey man, I was trying to flag you down. There was some smoke coming out from under your truck, and I just wanted to let you know that something was going on." And the first thing I thought of is, you were not very smart in approaching somebody that way, chasing them down. But then at the same time, it was like, if I didn't really think this through, I definitely could have drawn my gun on somebody that didn't need to have a gun drawn on them. And if it was anybody else, I easily could have pressed the trigger too, and that would have been the end of my life, possibly the end of theirs as well. And it's just that's something that I always revert back to or think of my mind. And not that I base anything on that single circumstance. It just gets the wheels turning about decision making.
Yeah.
Evan, what about you? Have you really encountered anything in your time?
Well, so I've had several incidences of people road raging and trying to come at me. Luckily, for the most part, people back off whenever I get out of the truck or something like that. I've been just lucky enough from that. Like it's never escalated past like, hey, let's stop this, right? Like I've never had anyone actually stop me on the road. I've had a couple people follow me, and like when I pulled off to a gas station or something, they get out, cuss me out, but never anything past, right? Verbal exchanges. Um, I've had a lot of the encounters of people coming up. They'll ask you for money. Um, Typically, my first response is, "Hey, I don't carry cash." Like I've had people ask me if they want food, right? And then it's like, "Okay, well, hey, there's a whatever restaurant's close by. Let's walk over there. I'll get you food." And then 99% of the time, that's not what they want. And well, I just need money for food, and then it escalates from there. For the most part, I can through trial and error, basically, keeping aware of who's around me, and I can generally see it. Generally, with those, you kind of see it coming. They don't generally sneak up on me. I've gotten a lot more, I guess, standoffish towards people now. Generally, because I'm out with my wife and my son. So it's like if I see someone that, kind of turns, looks at us, and starts heading our way, I'll generally address that before they get, within maybe 15, 20 feet of me. Hey, do you need something? Not really being aggressive, but just holler out to them and try to get them to stop. And for the most part, that works pretty good. I haven't had a lot of run-ins with people getting up on me or getting aggressive, but like generally that seeing someone look at you, because generally they're going to be looking at you if they're coming to talk to you for something like that, and trying to address that earlier on. That I use that personally because I don't have a lot of history in close combat, things like that. So that helps me to engage with somebody and stop them a little bit earlier and create that distance to where I can make a decision. We can figure out, my wife and my son can move away if something looks like it's going to happen, or get back in the car or wherever we're at. That's generally the best for me right now. That's kind of how we've worked through a lot of that, is kind of doing that. Honestly, I haven't gotten, again, I'd like to do some form of mixed martial arts. I'll be honest, I just haven't found somewhere to take classes, and that's on me, right? Like I haven't extended that part of my training to that yet. Hopefully it'll come up. Well, it's kind of like everything, the best laid intentions. Someday that's going to get me because I'm not following through with it. I just got to stop making excuses, right? But
So, John, when it comes to one of the interesting things that you recently talked about, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, and Evan talking about some of his circumstances, Evan's a stocky guy. Like he's not a small guy. And one thing that you mentioned is that, being in shape, being larger, being fit on its own can be a deterrence itself, and not being a blob, not looking like you're just a soft target. Am I correct on that, or am I a little bit off?
Yeah, that's 100% true. I mean, you can tell. I mean, they've done studies on this with law enforcement officers that have excess hypertrophy. Like they almost never get into issues. I mean, I remember listening to actually Ronnie Coleman when he was a cop, because he was
yeah,
a police officer. I forget. I think in the Dallas area.
yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was a cop for like 10 years. And he's like, yeah, every time I showed up, instant peace. Like, like,
Yeah, that was while he was doing Olympia. That was his first several titles. He was still a cop.
right, like that tracks, like it's just like we there's a lot of social dynamics that go into any kind of attack. Like there's all these pre-combat or pre-contact, pre-assault cues. Um, there's all these things that like people let us know subtly, I'm about to hit you. And they're also making the risk assessment as they do it. Like, and how do I do it if I do it?
Mm.
And then when they see somebody with large muscles, it's like, yeah, this ain't worth the risk, right? Like I'm probably just gonna go ahead and they like people are aware of their own limits to where they'll make good decisions, good things that are decisions good for their own safety, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, because I mean, bad guys are criminals regardless, right? Like they don't want to get whooped, they don't want to get shot, they don't want to get stabbed. I mean, they're looking for the easy payday, right? Unless it's outside of being something personal. But uh, another thing that I wanted to ask you about is, and I think you touched on this when I took your defensive handgun combatives class down here, is that whenever it comes to an entanglement, whenever somebody goes hands on, it's not necessarily a fight for whatever it is what they want at that time. If they realize that you have a gun on you, now it's a fight for that gun. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more on where your standpoint is and how to approach those things?
yeah, I mean, so a lot of so you're talking about like addressing kind of like this retention inside the holster, right? Like where people can, if they see the pistol or anything like that, they understand that there's a threat, and like, that'll typically encourage them to try to get it, because and it may or not be because they actually want to use it on you. It's just they just don't want it to be used on them, right? Especially if they're getting the better of you. Because that's kind of like the way street fights go. They start or a lot of gunfights really started off as fist fights, and then like some kind of weapon gets introduced, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
gun, knife, some shoe, even the thing we walk around on. It's an omnipresent impact weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people they recognize that. So what I would say, or how I would approach it, is kind of like your basic options for every fight is really control the fight from as furthest distance possible. So like if you can kind of talk them the way that Evan was just talking about, if you can address them and let them know kind of, hey, I see you, I want you to stay over there. That's going to be an easy fight to win, because it's like, okay, as they continue to encroach on you, you have reason to believe, like, as I told this guy not to come and he's still coming. So I've got a good
Yeah.
reason. I got, reasonable suspicion that there's something not good about to happen. Then you get into the fight. You have to fight them as if they might be armed. Now, it doesn't mean that you fight them as if, like, that doesn't mean you can use lethal force per se,
Mm-hmm.
that you have to maintain the ability to escalate and de-escalate as needed. Um, like you talked about your experience training jujitsu. Like when somebody can physically dominate you and impose their will on you, they can establish some kind of control as a grown man. A lot of times that takes a lot of fight out of people. Or they're gonna continue to push on, and then in which case, then that's like, all right, this person they're going for my gun or anything like that. Now I have kind of like that. It's kosher for me to introduce lethal force. So that's kind of like the overall strategy in terms of like how to approach weapon retention inside the holster. A lot of it is controlling the distance from the fight from the furthest distance possible. Even kind of takes that out of the equation. So that's why there is a separate course where it's like, hey, this is only the shooting stuff, and this is kind of the shooting stuff without context of having another human being kind of like fighting you. This is kind of the technique that you need to know how to do that. So that way, when you get into those circumstances, you understand what it is exactly you need to do. And then on a separate course is where I introduce kind of the force and force, the fighting, the basic controls, and everything like that. So there's a progressive model that helps. Every single module builds on the other, and they can also be done on their own. So like, let's say you understand how to shoot or anything like that, or you watch enough YouTube videos on the thumb pictorial index and don't need to learn it again. Well, I have another course where we can do that. And so you can basically pick what it is that you need. That's how I've approached my own coursework.
Cool, man. That's awesome. Um, had something in mind here. I was going to ask
No,
you about. You got
I
something?
got a. Well, yeah, this is just a question as we've been talking that I just thought would be kind of interesting to bring up. Do you have, and this is probably the bad way to approach it, but is there a preferred position for you to carry, as far as like where you carry your concealed weapon, with the idea of basically hands-on combative in mind? Like, did that ever change your concept on where you wanted to carry, or is it still just strictly mainly a comfort thing for you?
Yes. And I mean that in the terms of like, it's not really this or that for me. It's
Okay.
like, yeah, like, um, in general, like you want to remove friction. So
Mm-hmm.
comfort of carry, that's a barrier. Like if people
Mm-hmm.
are not comfortable carrying, that's going to be a barrier to them carrying. Because like what's the number one rule of a gunfight? Bring it on.
Having a gun.
Right. So, right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, if I'm gonna get into one, I want to make sure I'm not forfeiting. So I'm gonna make sure
Gotcha.
it's on me. So as far as my position, my preferred position is the appendix carry. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I find that comfortable for me. I find that fast for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's adaptive in terms of like I can use it for the pure concealment side. I can draw from a seated position, whether I'm
Mm-hmm.
got some kind of like a horizontal structure in front of me, like a table, a dashboard, or anything like that. I can draw from concealment relatively easily,
Mm-hmm.
and also it applies to those higher level skills, skill needed, like fighting, like actually fighting to
Yeah.
obtain the pistol. So appendix is kind of my go-to. For duty, I'll carry strong side, like
Yeah.
pretty much every other cop. And um
Yeah.
so those are kind of like the two main spots I will recommend people. I know like there's some advantages for the entangled fight for
Mm-hmm.
picks that aren't with like your strong side carry.
Okay.
But again, like if it's more comfortable for you to carry strong side, I'd rather you do that instead of force the position.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's never like a perfect circumstance, right?
True.
There's always trade-offs for everything. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like me trading today is going to be a trade-off from time of other things I'm going to do, or me, you know what I mean? And all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing apply. And that's a truism across the board for everything that you do. So if I'm going to carry strong side, maybe there's some things I got to do, but there's also things I got to be compensate for with appendix carry.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I rather like you ever see like the videos on like fat guy appendix carry?
Yeah.
Yeah, why? Like why? Like why force this dude to do
Yeah.
something uncomfortable? He's
Yeah.
probably gonna stop carrying now. Like you probably do better off just helping him lose weight, or just putting him in
True.
comfortable,
True.
or putting him in a position to carry comfortably.
Yeah.
So he's gonna do
Yeah.
it all the time and train with it all the time. Like that's just way better. Like I think that's just a lot more productive of a conversation in terms of like forcing a position.
I agree. I just that was one of those interesting questions. Just as we were talking about, I wasn't sure if there was something. I was interested to see if there was anything that had happened. Like maybe you were like, "Oh, I only carry this because something happened." But like we kind of discussed, comfort, right, and having it in the first place plays a big role into that.
So, I recalled what I was going to ask you about. One thing that we don't touch on is like knives or anything like that. I mean, even for myself, I carry a pocket knife every day, but that's because it's a cutting tool, right? I don't use it as a defensive tool. I have no experience with knives, uh, none absolutely in relation to defense or things like that. Do you work with anything in knives in your defensive course, or uh is it all like gun related, getting the gun out in an entangled fight?
So my thing right now is all gun related. I do have a like edge weapons course, but it's mostly like a more of a cautionary tale than it is a like um in terms of recommendation. And
Okay.
let me unpack that a little bit. Like, have you guys ever like hit a punching bag like as many times as you can, right? Like in a short period, right? Like as
Mm-hmm.
fast as you can, as hard as you can, as quick as you can, right? So
Okay.
you guys recognize like how physical that is.
Yes.
Now, also imagine you're doing that, and now you also you've got your there's a person that is that punching bag, and they're fighting you back at the same time, right? And now think about that legal aftermath we talked about. Um, how do I knife somebody up to the point where they are number one, I stop the threat, right, and whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I had to make the cops show up, and it looks like a literal murder scene, and
Yeah.
now I've got to make myself look like a good guy. Now, I'm not anti-knife by any stretch of the imagination. However, that's a trade-off, right? Like that is
Yeah.
a real trade-off.
Yeah. The optics.
Right. The optics of the legal aftermath and
Yeah.
also during the fight, it's incredibly physical. It is physically taxing to hold someone, push them off, and knife them up, right? And it's like and the I've been stabbed twice. So I did not when I got stabbed, I didn't think like, oh man, this is a knife. And I didn't feel like this is
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel incapacitated, right? Like what I felt was like, man, this felt like someone had punched me. And
Yeah.
there's I live not too far from Albuquerque where there's a lot of MMA fighters and they get into fights, and this dude like he got into fight, and one dude was just like kind of he thought he was punching him in the ribs, but he was actually stabbing him.
Ooh.
Same thing happened here in El Paso, and it's kind of a consistent report where people they're getting stabbed in the middle of a fight and they think that they're getting punched. So, I think that you need to know essentially what's called dirty boxing, and then you
Okay.
attach a knife to the end of your strike, and that's really what
Hmm.
to me that's what knife fighting is. I don't have this approach like a traditional like seven angles of attack. I think of forehand,
Mm-hmm.
backhand, thrust. That's it. And you got to make sure that you're able to generate power with the hips. So it's a very condensed dirty boxing cycle or a dirty boxing module. And so that's how I approach knife training, and also thinking about breaking the grips in terms of like someone's holding you and they're trying to hurt you. You've got to roll your wrist around to try to get the knife, get their grip off of you. Because if you cut
Mm-hmm.
their arm as they're grabbing you, that might encourage them to let go. And so,
Yeah.
uh, if if that doesn't work, then you have to figure out ways to kind of almost shake them off. And this is something I talk about, but the main thing is that how do we actually train for that? Like, what are the training methods that apply there, and how do we transpose that, and also doing it while using the force required, as opposed to kind of going crazy. And because most of what has to happen is really you got to generate force from the strike as opposed to trying to stab them as many times as possible, because a lot of times if you do that, if you take that approach, it's um it's not going to have as much efficacy as you think. And
Yeah.
I've been around pro fighters a long time. I know a lot of people think that they can drop somebody with one punch, but like it's a lot harder than people think. A lot harder. So that's kind of like how my personal approach to the knife training is. Understand that issue of the legal aftermath looking like a literal murder scene. Understand like during it, it's incredibly taxing, incredibly physical. So it may not be the tool for you if like you're somebody with a heart condition or someone who's deconditioned.
Mm-hmm.
And also um, then before, as far as the training goes, it's like, well, what are the training methods, right? So that answer your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. I've always wondered, like, from a self-defense standpoint, if someone, like, let's say you're just getting beat in a fight, and then I always feel like in that type of a situation, if that person doesn't have a knife and then you pull out a knife, I don't know. I genuinely feel like the optics of that are not going to side in your favor. Should it go in front of a jury or something? I don't know. I just feel like that's a hard one to look at.
Well, it's just like pulling out a gun. It's like
I guess, yeah, you're
you have
right.
to articulate with an objective reason that says like, hey, this guy
Yeah,
was going to kill a cripple. He was going to do something to kill or cripple me. There
yeah,
has to be some type of objective reason. Like the whole mantra, I was in fear for my life, is like you
yeah,
were emotional and you were scared, so you decided to murder this person from being scared.
yeah,
That doesn't work.
yeah,
Yeah.
So the knife, all the same things that apply to a gun apply to a knife as far as the rule of
yeah,
the use. It's just the method and how you use it. That's a very different thing. And that requires, I think that requires a lot more training than a pistol does. A pistol is very simple,
hmm,
but difficult to master, whereas a knife, it's very simple to inflict damage, but to do it in such a way where you're not looking like the bad guy, like that's the difficult part. That's where like the nuance plays.
yeah. It's weird to me. Like I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm like, the funny thing is like talking about defensively using a pistol. I have no problem with that, and then for some reason a knife is sitting here. Like the psychology of that for me, for some reason, is weird. I don't. It's just one of those things. I'm just sitting here like it. Of course, the theory behind it remains the same, right? On use when you how you would use it, what you would use it for. But it's I don't know why for some reason the like thinking about it just I guess because I don't really ever think about using my knife in that capacity. Similar to Todd, right? I carry a pocket knife for cutting things, right? It's utilitarian purpose. So
Yeah. And a folding knife like that, that'd be the worst choice because those
yeah,
things tend to like they're hard to get out. What you want is probably something like
a
this.
fixed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
blade. This is one of the shipworks thing. This is a Sipel, but it's
Oh,
a
cool.
has a
Yeah.
reverse edge.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it's a small fixed blade because also like there's all these statutes and legalities around knives.
Yeah.
A push dagger may be legal here and illegal
Hmm.
there. Like, uh,
Length of blade, stuff like that. Yeah.
right. So all those things play a part as well. And it's and most of your juries are going to be retired school teachers. So you're going to have to convince
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
retired school teacher that was like, yeah, I needed to kind of create this scene and make this happen this way for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge. That's a challenge. So
Mm.
that's where that framing of this being a cautionary tale as opposed to
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
yes or no. This is like, yeah, you can do this, but
Hmm.
this is the thing you're up against. So if you do this,
Yeah.
you need to make sure you do it right.
And one other thing that I think about when it comes to anyone like the use of a blade, not that a blade is by any means like non-effective, right? I've seen clips of guys that they think, like you said, they think somebody punches them and they stabbed them, and then they stabbed them in the right place, and then 5-10 minutes later they bled out and they're dead. But there are people that also get stabbed up, go to the hospital, they're fine, no life-threatening injuries, and just as the same people, or just as people, in the same context, they get shot and they go to the hospital and they leave without any life-threatening injuries. Um, what I'm getting to is that the ability to deliver fight-stopping hits with a knife versus putting hits in an 8-inch circle with a handgun, essentially. Where do you think the ability lies for somebody for carrying a knife, like when you get in that entanglement and you're it's no holds bars, man, like it, and it's just a stabbing spree? Is it really, are you really able to get it where you need to go? If, I guess, if you're more experienced you can, or is it just emotional going crazy? Like what do you tend to see with that in your experience?
Well, I mean the as far as efficacy, it's just like it's unpredictable, right? Like we just don't know. Like yeah, there's a sure the Walmart steak knife or kitchen knife is kind of like what what a lot of people call like a weapon of mass destruction in terms of like of killing people. Like, yeah, it like knives can kill. I mean, that's how
Mhm.
humans have killed each other for a long time. Is one guy hold one dude down, and his friend will come with something sharp and stick it in him. But like the areas to target with a knife are it's very difficult because it's like the quality of the blade. It could hit bone. So like we have a natural body armor for our vital organs with our ribs. So like that's something to avoid. Or you can go to the neck, but um typically during an attack, then yeah, something it's just kind of like the I would say the general thing I see is like slashes typically send people to the ER, and stab is where people go to the morgue.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of a thing, right? Like what's the best caliber? It's like, well, some bullets kill, some don't. All of them hurt. Like so
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I was just curious, thinking about it that way, about putting things where they need to be for them to do what we need them to do.
yeah. On the
Um,
guy side, like that, you have to target kind of soft areas. So below the ribs, under the ribs, around the neck, cheeks. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where you need to go. But most, like we've got the natural body armor from the ribs. That's hard to get through. You could kind of penetrate somebody in the chest, but it's really hard. It's really hard. You know what I mean? But in general, what you want to do is kind of almost using like shovel hooks that you see in boxing, like body shots, and
Mhm.
that's kind of like the general approach that I like is shovel hooks and then aiming below the eyebrows for the soft tissues on the face.
hmm, interesting. Good stuff, man.
Squishy parts.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's something I knife anything encounters with a knife, man, like that's my biggest I would say probably my biggest nightmare just because of seeing how violent those always are. Like it's like man, that's the last thing I want to encounter. Um but yeah, so we'll kind of segue here for to finish out. Um you've definitely started to explore a heck of a lot more into practical shooting. And I saw you had a post that you have, was it Tim Herron you have that you're
Yep.
using you hired him for personal coaching?
Yep.
Dude, that's awesome. I'd like you to kind of talk to us a little bit how that experience is going, having somebody like Tim Herron as your personal mentor, and trying to get you to the level like what's like, is it, are you having like profound moments or is it little tweaks here and there that are making the biggest difference in your performance?
Man, I mean, Tim Tim himself is an interesting character because he's a smaller dude, and I've always had this theory that innovation in combat sports always came from like lighter weight classes.
Mhm.
Typically, like your lightweights, your female fighters, they always come up with like very, very interesting techniques. And a lot of that really comes from like needing to survive the meat grinder that is like the pressure that comes in the gym. So they really put a they kind of max out on all the other attributes. So what happens is technique becomes a separator. And meeting Tim, he showed me a lot of that. Like he's very innovative with his technique, the way he has grip pressure and the way he considers structure with his grip behind the gun. Like he's not so concerned with the type of platform that he's using as much as he's concerned with where his grip pressures are with his hands and where his hands are in relation to that pistol. So it was really, really interesting. I trained with him for the first time, I think like 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, got a private lesson with him half day. And the way the way he explained shooting to me, it was like, oh, wow. Okay, so this is actually its own martial art. This is a whole other thing that I was not aware of. And like seeing him shoot, I was like, okay, this isn't just shooting fast. This is like martial excellence. This is real mastery with a pistol. That's what I saw when I trained with Tim. And we've always, I mean, we've been friendly. I can't really say we're friends. You know, we don't know each other like very personally, but we've remained friendly for several years now. We just kind of have similar viewpoints on training, even though it's like different frame of reference. And I continue to work through practical shooting and continue to consult with him. And he's happy, he's gracious with his time, and he'll look at some of my things. And so I finally decided to just kind of get serious about this. And this is something like I want the listeners at home to understand. Like I'm I do this like in terms of like people pay me to do these things. So that's why like I've kind of gone overboard. Like I've pursued getting a jujitsu black belt from the person I got it from. The it's doing strength training, uh doing practical shooting and pursuing like this is not like this is way overboard than what you need to kind of be ready in terms of like self-defense. So I just want to make sure that people understand that it's like this is my standard for me because I believe that my clients deserve more than my biases, and that they deserve for me to be the best version of myself for them. So I've decided like I'm gonna pursue getting a masterclass rating at a minimum for shooting. The the reason for that is because it's the only internationally known objective standard for shooting. Like IPSC shooters, they all know what that means. Like they don't use it the way we do, like, but they know that it means something. And it's
Mhm.
something that a consistency of performance gets you, right? Like it's not something that it can be given. It's something that you actually have to objectively earn. And the classification system, the reason why I really respect it is because it's a living system. It's like as the skill level for those classifiers improves, so does the performance required to obtain them. And it's kind of remained relatively consistent, but for the most part, like you can have a guy who was like a master class like 10 years ago, and like he stopped all of a sudden, like they're at the kind of performing down with your C or B class dudes. So I just find it incredibly interesting. I love the way that practical shooting is very like very pointed. It's really like it's really just about the shooting. It's not about transposing this or like let's talk about tactics or anything like that. Like it's just about purely the skill development of shooting. And I realize like how many people in this business don't know anything about shooting, like or how little they know, and how much I was able to learn in just these 2 years. So like having somebody like a Tim Herron as a coach who's been doing this like 20 years as a national level competitor, man, like I'm pretty grateful for that. Like I've got access to these type of people, and they're willing to invest in me, and help me out with this stuff.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, I have there's a guy I've been talking to on social media. And he's a master class production shooter, and I think he's out of the Midwest. And he like right after, like a week after I posted a video of a classifier I shot, he shot the same classifier. And he messaged me. He's like, "Hey, isn't this the same one you shot?" And I said, "Yeah." Looked at it, and I was like, "Wow, you know the way you performed on that stage compared to how I did it is, it's world of difference." And he got to talking to me, and he's like, "Yeah, man, the way that you're doing it is, this is getting you X result. You need to consider doing this or doing that." And then after he kind of just threw that out there, I asked him the question, "Hey, man, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Do I need to focus on this? Do I need to focus on that?" And having somebody that is in that classification and doesn't look down on anybody, below them, and is willing to share that knowledge, man, like, dude, that's awesome. Um, there's been a couple guys that I've interacted with that have that standpoint, and because we all started somewhere, right? That's kind of the way I view it as well. But I like how you said for the viewers that, hey, you know, everything that we may be pursuing isn't what anybody needs necessarily to be successful. And one thing that Alex Sanson of the Suited Shootist always says is that, you know, in the context of regular everyday earth people, right? What is the average person that wants to carry a gun to defend themselves? What skill set do they actually need to prevail at a, you know, at a base level? And that's always been something that's interesting to me to try to type of separate, right? It's like, hey, if we can get you drawing from concealment in a respectable time and putting fast, accurate rounds in an 8-inch circle, you're probably good to go. If we can get you doing that and then push you towards competition and get you engaged in that, even better. If you start chasing that rabbit, dude, rock on. Like that's what we'd like to see, because now you're chasing that level of performance, and that's just going to do nothing but translate across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I define success as an instructor that when my like, what does winning for me as an instructor look like is that people continue to train while I'm not there. And that's really what I like to empower people with is just training methods. I'm easy to find. I'm not like one of these veteran guys that have 1 million followers. So like usually if you message me, it's gonna be me. And so like whenever people hit me up with questions, I'll try to help them as best as I can. And now that I've settled in, I've got a new job that's very incredibly supportive, where I'm just purely an instructor role. Uh, I'm gonna be putting out more content and talking about what I'm doing. I like to document what I'm doing, not so much create content around instructor or telling people what they need to do, so to speak. If they got questions about what I'm doing and it's something, then that's kind of how a lot of this came out. Is like I just really talked about what I'm doing, and then people wanted me to come and teach them. So, um, but yeah, so I've got Tim Herron, Mike Pannone, Matt Pranka is also another one that has been really super helpful. Um, and that's like there's a lot of parallels with jujitsu or martial arts training and the practical shooting world. And a lot of it really, the main one is like how cool the community is. Like, yeah, sure, there are some kind of like loud mouths, but every community has that. But the practical shooting world, I mean, they're incredibly inviting. Almost everyone's really nice. No one takes themselves like super hyper serious, like a lot of like tactical folks do. And they're just about getting better. They're all just pursuing mastery in this thing that they like doing.
And that right there, I like that a lot. Because Nick Young, we had him on the podcast. I think it's been about a year now, and his recent podcast that he just launched, his most recent episode, he's talking, you know, he's a masterclass shooter and he's doing some crazy stuff in performance. And in my opinion, I really like what he's doing. But he says in his podcast, this recent episode, he was like, no matter where I'm at, he's like, I always feel like my grip is not good enough. This isn't good enough. That's not good enough. I need to do better. And that resonated with me, because like even when I'm doing things that it seems like like it hit a different level or something, right, man? Like, oh, this is it. Like, there's still something that is not right. Even in my dry fire training, like nothing ever always feels right. And it tends to push me to pursue and keep going and refine and try to make sure that I'm not just staying stagnant, right? Something can always be better.
Yeah. Well, and one thing too, I'll just caution, you and the viewers at home is don't forget to tell yourself the things you're doing well too. Like don't just put those things away, because like I'm sure, the guy you were, Todd from 5 years ago would love to have the skill that Todd today has, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So like, so
100%.
right. So like don't put that aside. Like if you do something well, like capture that and feel good about that and embrace that. Like, yeah, I did this well. Like even if it was like one great reload or something like that or whatever, like embrace what you do well, because and because people will hear us say that way, and I'm like that too. I'm very very hard on myself. I think like the way I talk to myself about how to train, and like I bet that it would probably make a lot of people cry. But in any say, but it can put you in a cycle where like nothing's ever good enough, right? And then like you just end up pissed off and like not liking training. And I feel like that's what happens why a lot of people end up quitting, because they're so focused on all the things that they did wrong that they forget to celebrate the things that went right. And I'm only saying that not just for you, but also for like people at home. It's like, like we don't want to see you guys quit. We want to see you guys continue to train. So, take those small victories because you earn them, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree. And like, I don't, yeah, I'm not in here having a pity party for myself, when stuff doesn't go right, but I'll get, I had a time to where, when we had our property, I could just walk out back and I had my own berm and I could train all the time. And I was really I was at a time I was training hard and I was hitting some benchmarks for myself and it was consistent. And then we moved and my training dropped off. And then I kind of like just went backwards, right? And it was very frustrating, but I never lost the drive to like, hey, I've seen that I can do this. I've seen that I can perform at this level. Um, let's just do what we need to do to get back there because I know how to get back there. Uh, so that happens. That happened before, and then even now, whenever I'm doing stuff, it's like I said, I'm not dogging on myself. It's just fine tweaks. I notice, hey, okay, this is what happened. That could be better. Let's try to clean this up. Like you're talking about with reloads. I actually did recorded a video earlier today talking about reloads, and it's not necessarily, like you said, telling people what to do. It's just this is what I focus on that works, gives me the best results. But even in the video, I have it on there. Like I hung some reloads, man. Like they weren't perfect, and I tell everybody, like, hey, this is what happened. This is what went wrong. This is what I'm identifying, and this is what I'm trying to correct to develop the consistency for it. So, yeah, when I tell people that, nothing ever seems like it's perfect, it's not that I hate training by any means. Usually my hands are burned out, and I would prefer to keep going if I could because I want to see the consistency before I stop. Personally, for me, I used to shoot archery a lot, and that was a downfall for me. I would wear myself out to an extent to where the next day I'd be so sore that I couldn't continue going. And so I have to know mentally, like, hey, all right, it's time to shut it off, pick it back up tomorrow, and we can keep addressing it from there.
An idea too, like because that recently, I, I don't know why it's taken so many years to actually like the next foot fall forward to fall right on this, was like consistency of performance is a thing, right? But especially now, like I've got 4 kids, and all these things. So I started thinking about like, well, I started talking about sustainability, and I was like, oh, what I need is sustainable consistency. I had never heard anybody really use those two words together, sustainable consistency. And that's like, oh man, I don't know why it's taken me this many years to like put that together, because like a lot of people they want to like do all the things, like if they don't dry fire exactly, their 35 minutes or whatever it is that they decide, or work out, they just want to do all the things all the time, and then they can't, and they get overwhelmed and doing nothing. And it's like, no, like what you've got to do, at least this is something I've started telling people and telling clients, is like you just find what's sustainable, find what level of consistency is sustainable. And if you have that where it's like 5 minutes of dry fire, I don't know, 2 different lifts twice a week or something like that, and maybe you go to jujitsu once or twice a week or something like that, then that's going to be super sustainable, because that's like what, maybe 4 hours of training, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
probably less than that. And so yeah, that's like an idea I haven't really heard anybody really discuss, this idea of like doing things but in a way that is going to be sustainable, where you maintain that skill, and the skill is growing like incrementally. It isn't going to grow at the level you want it. You're not going to get mastery tomorrow, but who does, right? and
Right.
and the reason why I mentioned that is because I everyone in myself included, really underestimates what they're going to accomplish in a year, and they deeply underestimate what they will accomplish in 10. Right? So like if you have some kind of sustainable consistency, if you do that for 10 years, Like imagine like what, like, you don't
Yeah.
miss a day, 10 years. So from
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes of dry fire, that's a significant amount of improvement.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, I forgot, I mention this all the time, but I can't remember who I heard it from. And like where you said, me 5 years ago would have loved to have the skill that I have today, is to the average person that's carrying a gun, the average concealed carrier, a C class shooter has godlike capabilities to them.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and when I heard that, like that really resonated to me. And I'm like, man, that's never really thought about it that way until somebody mentioned it.
It sounds like something Nick might have said while he was on here.
Possibility. Yeah, it's very much
Honestly, I
a
think that might have been
possibility.
who said it.
But it's one of those things that, we look at, those of us that are involved in practical shooting and we're striving for our different goals. And it's like, it's from the average everyday person, like we are well above and beyond of what they think that they could even accomplish. And thinking back to when I first started this journey, I never would have thought I'd had the skill set that I have today, that I think that needs to be above and beyond better now, so it's just interesting to think about it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you can go to a match and finish without getting a penalty, that's way above any person, like way above the skill you're going to need for most self-defense situation.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you, man. Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to wrap it up here. We're right at an hour and 16. I don't want to hold you any longer than that. Uh, man, go ahead and hit us with the shameless plug. Where can everybody find you at, your classes, and what you have going on in the future?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me at combativessummit.com. I mean, if you just search John Valentine Combatives, I'm at John V _actual on all the socials. And yeah, I mean, I haven't put out anything for next year yet, but I'm looking. So if anybody wants to host, just shoot me a message. We'll set something up.
Okay. Awesome. Are you on YouTube or anything like that? You're just the standard social. You're on YouTube as well. Okay. Awesome.
All the same. At John V _actual.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, sir, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I absolutely enjoyed the conversation with you. Hopefully to stay in touch with you, and excited to see your practical shooting journey and where it takes you.
Sure. Todd, Evan, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you
Sure.
too.
All right, for everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this podcast, share this episode with your friends if you like what you're doing. If you want, you can also go and search for classes that we have coming up in the future on www.citizendefense.net. And the next one will be at Big Tech's Ordnance on January 25th, 2025. So make sure you check that out. And until next time, y'all stay safe.